Hello and welcome back to the Book Marketing Tips and Author Success Podcast. This is Penny Sansevieri.
And Amy Cornell.
And we're really excited. We're back for week 3. And I want to kick off this show, first off, by thanking you all so much for your responses. We actually are getting some really great questions through our text to chat with Amy and Penny. And we're going to answer one of those at the end of the show. But I just want to remind you to text the word podcast to 888-402-8940 and send us your show idea. We've gotten some show ideas too that Amy and I are going to brainstorm. Send us your questions, show feedback, all the things. We love that. And speaking of show feedback, we are still doing, and this is going to be in the show notes, we are still doing listener feedback for 2026. So we love your responses, by the way. We've gotten a whole bunch of responses from people. We build these shows around you all. So what do you want to see more of? What do you want to see less of? What's the ideal show length? We're getting a lot of people who really like the 30-minute shows. Not so many that like up to an hour. So we apologize when we get super chatty, which we do, obviously, from time to time.
Absolutely.
But so, Amy, I know we're talking today specifically about A+ content, and we're going to dive headlong into that in just a second. But I wanted to start off with, I mentioned this to you in text, and I remember you said, I don't understand how that's a thing. Because every time Amazon, and this is actually true. Every time Amazon does something, you and I are always kind of like, I don't understand how that's a thing.
Right.
So in December, and it's interesting kind of when Amazon launched this, like they launched it in December when everybody was distracted and you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And we didn't really get a lot of new data until the first part of this year. So starting on January 20th, they're changing their DRM stuff, basically. Okay. So when you upload your book to Kindle and you check, the DRM, a lot of us think that really protects our book. And essentially, I mean, if anybody wants to pirate your book, they can pirate it. And anybody who's been pirated can tell you that that's true. What Amazon is now doing is they are starting to give readers the opportunity. This is where I lost Amy in the texturing, to actually download the book file to their Kindle, to their computer, to read it offline, to read it on their phone, to whatever. And the reason that Amazon's doing this is because readers have spoken up. And anytime Amazon does anything, it's all very customer/reader focused. I just wrote an article. We don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole on this, but I just wrote an article on this for IBPA, which we will link in the show notes. And it's an interesting take. It's a lot less like everybody like, oh my, like I had a client write me the day that this announcement came out. She's like, oh my gosh, Amazon is, ruining all the things. And I think that's everybody's sort of first inclination whenever Amazon changes something. It's like, oh my gosh, Amazon's making my life harder. This really doesn't have, like, if you want your DRM settings, if you don't want people to download your book, fine, you can still do that. But the option to allow downloads, and in the IBPA article, I write about why you might want to actually do that and why, where it fits and where it's a good idea. So you definitely want to explore that. Like I said, we'll put that in the show notes. But it was one of those things, Amy, where like you and I were chatting and you were just like, I don't even know how that's possible.
Right? That's the thing. I want to know how people figured this out.
Yeah, I do too.
Because I certainly didn't get a message saying like, check out this great new feature. You know what I mean? So it's like, what?
Yeah. And you might on your Kindle, because I do read on I read on a Kindle app. I don't really read on a Kindle device, but you may get a notification on your Kindle that says, hey, guess what, Amy? You can now download, do you want to download this book?
And like everything else, if I did get it, I probably swiped it away because I'm like, no, I barely get time to read as it is. Don't bother me.
So for some people like Amy, who's very busy, she's not going to pay attention to your notification. But anyway, we will link the article in the show notes. Here's the thing that y'all need to know. It's it's much less caustic of a thing than you probably initially thought. Because a lot of authors lost their minds on Reddit. Like to write this article for IBPA, I did a deep dive into the Kindle boards and on Reddit, and people were just like, oh my God, this is awful. And it's really not that big of a change. I mean, honestly, it's not like Amazon saying, oh, all your books are going to be free or download. You
Right.
know, as an author slash publisher, you still have that choice. So anyway, link in the show notes. But Amazon A plus content is I know we've done a couple of shows on this. I really love talking about A plus content in that a lot of times authors really forget the importance of not just grabbing back more real estate on your Amazon retail page, because the A plus content, by the way, if you're listening to this, you're just like, Penny, I don't even know what A plus content is. If you've ever seen a retail page, whether it's book or otherwise, that has imagery on it,
Mhm.
that is Amazon's A plus content. And Amazon rolled out A plus content originally with products, just not non-book items on Amazon. That's how they originally noticed it. And we're going to talk a little bit about the conversion lift about A plus content and why Amazon moved it over to books. But what we're really talking about, I mean, other than, yes, taking back space on your Amazon retail page, is how your brain reacts to your retail page in the first few seconds, right? So visuals anchor expectations, they build trust, all of the things, which is why a lot of times on this podcast, Amy and I preach the importance of a good book cover, because that is the first visual that the reader sees when they land on your retail page, right?
Yep.
If you can get them to scroll down through your book description and see the A plus content, that's a win, because A plus content can hook and convert readers. And we'll talk a little, the conversion numbers, by the way, when we get to that, are really kind of astounding. I did a little bit of a deep dive on this the other day as we were preparing for this podcast, and it's pretty amazing how much of a sales lift that you can get from well-placed A plus content. Amy, I want to ask you, I know that you work on a lot of A plus content for our authors. And also, just as a side note, we talk a lot about how you can access A plus content, how you can upload it. So we want to make sure and address that in this, because we've done a number of shows on how problematic it is when authors cannot access these modules. And I think that this show will really drive home, the importance of it. But where do you see that authors make the biggest mistakes in A plus content? Just across the board.
Uh, the top things that come to mind in terms of what I see most often, one, a lot of authors don't use it at all,
Right.
which is a huge, because it's interesting when you're on a book page that doesn't have A plus content. I'm sure you've experienced this, Penny, and I'm sure a lot of people listening have as well. When you're a shopper, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
How you get past the book description and maybe you're looking for reviews, and it's weird how when sometimes you scroll through a bunch of nonsense, especially if an author doesn't have like a great bio. It's crazy how much like wasteland there can be on your retail page if you're not utilizing all of these free features. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. It
And
totally makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just a bunch of like nonsense and technical stuff, and Amazon trying to sell you random stuff that you're not interested in and trying to distract you. Anyway, that's an aside, but another really like important reason for why you want to take advantage of all these free features that Amazon offers you, because it just makes your retail page seem so much more complete.
Yeah.
So a lot of times what I see is blurry content.
Oh,
So
yes.
you know what I mean? So
So
that's
yeah.
that's one that I see a lot, is where it may have looked great on whatever program they were using, but then once they uploaded it, it didn't convert well. And that happens a lot of times with fonts. Like some fonts may look great on your design program, but then they don't look great on Amazon's platform. And honestly, you're playing in Amazon's sandbox at that point. So you know, we don't get into all of the things, but that is a big one. You definitely want to look at your preview. And if it's not amazing, don't do it. You know what I mean? I think, Penny, this is one of those areas where good enough is more likely to actually hurt you than it will help you. You know what
Oh,
I
for
mean?
sure. Yes.
Yeah, so I would say blurry content. I would say content that also, I see this a lot as well, where it's not really obvious why it's there. So
Yeah.
maybe it makes sense to the author because they're more familiar with their book, they're more familiar with their subject matter, something like that. But as somebody who has no familiarity with the author, the book, or the subject matter, you kind of get a little lost because it tells your brain, like, it stops you from that natural flow of scrolling through the retail page and what you're expecting to see. So I would say off the top of my head, those are the biggest ones. So blurry imagery that doesn't look super crisp, like it didn't convert well when uploaded. And then content on the page that is out of context for just an everyday shopper. You know, you kind of almost have to be an insider to know, to make sense of why it's there and what the value is.
Right. Exactly. And here's the really weird thing. Aside from the sales numbers, which, like I said, I've alluded to now a whole bunch of times, and we'll talk about in a second. But
She's really keeping us on the edge of our seats with that, isn't she?
I know, sorry. I know. I'm just dangling those sales numbers.
I know, I love it.
But here's the thing is really well done A+ content. Yes, it should match, like Amy said, you know, no blurry images. It should match your cover, your category, all those other things. It does reassure the buyer, right? So, but to, you know, that, okay, this is what I want to read, et cetera, et cetera. But it also lowers the amount of returns that you get for your book because they thought it was something else, but it's really not. And the A+ content can do a lot to sort of further unpack the topic, right?
Or kill your read throughs.
Yes, yes, exactly, exactly. And you know, I mean, the A+ content, and I know, you know, Amy talked about this, but you have to, I mean, I'm a huge fan of putting verbiage on A+ content, but I'm not a fan of throwing a bunch of words on there just to add words. Like, I would rather have something that was so visually appealing because the brain actually processes images far faster than it does text. So I think there's a statistic, excuse me, I'm apparently having a hard time talking in the new year, that said that the brain processes images around 60,000 times faster than verbiage,
Wow.
which we still want you to have a book description. Like, if you're listening, they're just like, well, why just I don't leave the book description blank? Because you can't do that. But prioritizing imagery, you know, doing a balanced combination of imagery and verbiage, I think is really the way to go, as opposed to having just, because I've seen A+ content where somebody just crammed a whole bunch of text on there.
Right. They want to include like the entire review from Midwest Book Reviews in like a tiny square. It's like, that's not where that goes.
Right, exactly. But I mean, you know, you bring up a great point. So, you know, reviews, and I know, Amy, we can talk about the ins and outs of putting reviews on A+ content because Amazon gets a little weird about that too. But putting, you know, awards and reviews and things that you had on there, you don't necessarily have to include, as Amy said, the entire. You can just pick one line from the review and put the actual whole review like somewhere else on your page. Because the skimming is something that we do on, we skim before we read, right? And we do this not just on Amazon, we do this everywhere, which is why, like, when we talked about websites and having lots of skimmable text, and the same thing is true in Amazon, right? Having your book description not be just one clump of text, right? Making it something that is more skimmable, that the mind can more easily process. Because it's all really about converting people. Like, yes, you want to entice people with your A+ content, you want to dazzle them, but you want to sell a book at the end of the day. Otherwise, why are we even bothering with all of these, you know, little things, these hoops that Amazon makes you jump through to get to this A plus content. Speaking of which, Amy, talk a little bit about, so if an author's listening to this and they're like, oh, I really want to do this, how do we access A plus content? If an author has a publisher, can you talk about that just quickly? Because I think it's worth mentioning here.
Yeah, if you have a publisher and they uploaded your book for you through their account, you're going to have to give that to your publisher.
Okay, so what you're saying is that they would design the A plus content and then give it to the publisher to upload it.
Yes. And we do that a lot, honestly. We do that for a lot of clients because, we talk about this a lot. Publishers, they're there to produce books. I think a lot of people have very high expectations of what publishers are supposed to do, which has kind of led them down to like offering this and offering that. Doesn't mean that's what they specialize in or want to be doing. You know what I mean? So while they have access to A plus content, it makes complete sense that that is not a huge focus of theirs. You know what I mean? They are not there to help you with your brand long term. They're there to help you produce a book. So if you used a publisher or publishing service, check with them first. Just get the green light that before you spend a bunch of time designing things, get the green light from somebody saying, yes, we will upload that for you if you provide it, and then you're good to go. And if you've self-published and you have access to your book through Amazon, then it's quite literally through your KDP account under the marketing tab. And I will say, of all the things that we do on the back end of Amazon, sometimes the A plus content is actually pretty intuitive in terms of the platform walking you through the steps of how to upload, how to attach it to your book, how to submit it for approval, things like that. So
yeah, exactly. And you can go to because on the back end of Amazon, and it's way too in the weeds to get into on this podcast, but on the back end of Amazon, it gives you, in KDP, what Amy just mentioned, it gives you a whole bunch of different options for quote unquote modules, as Amazon refers to them. But you can literally just go start to dig through other retail pages and book pages, and you'll see pretty much what's available, because there are a whole bunch of different options to,
yes.
To choose from. Question. I know this wasn't in the show notes, but I'm just really curious. A lot of authors do, they use their A plus content to showcase their entire library of books. Like for an author who, let's say, has 6 or 7 books in a series or whatever, what do you think of that use of A plus content?
I think it can be, if you're using a lot of the more visual elements, it can be a great way to remind shoppers on your individual retail page that you have a series. But I'm a big fan of Amazon's dedicated series pages too. That's something else. That's an entirely different topic, but I love when authors take advantage of that because I think it makes it very simple for the shopper to actually shop and buy books in order and things like that. I thought that was a brilliant when they added that. That was one thing that, kudos to Amazon for getting right for sure. I think when you get super technical, it gets people don't want to see that. That's not what they're there for, because
Right.
Some of the modules get very technical. And honestly, I think that's because they essentially took what they gave regular retail products and were just like, we'll just plop this into the book section now and we're good to go.
Yeah.
So I think, everybody has access to the same kind of modules. And I know in the examples, they'll show series ones. We've done it a few times, but we focus specifically on using, if you're going to highlight a series, we focus on highlighting what, kind of that next level world building elements of the series. And again, if you use more visual modules versus the really technical ones, then again, I think it's a great way to do another just kind of subtle reminder that this book is a part of a series. You get to show people what those other covers look like. You know what I mean? There's some really smart ways to do it, but I would say, to your point, don't necessarily go with the really obvious module that says like, here's your series breakdown module. Like, look at some examples and see how other authors have handled it, because there are some more creative ways to do it that hold truer to the more visual elements versus breaking down a lot of technical specs like page numbers and things like that, that's not the kind of fun shopping, people are there for.
Right, exactly. And I know in next week's show, we're going to be talking about author brand, but the A plus content, if used correctly, can help to strengthen your author brand, just in terms of, consistency across series, reinforcing your expertise. if used correctly. But as you pointed out, Amy, I mean, if you're trying to cram too much into your A plus content, like I want to tell people about all the things as opposed to maybe thoughtfully spreading it out across a series, or you know what I mean? Or maybe drop putting that entire Midwest book review in cramming your A plus content. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Exactly. But I will say that, I mean, I love that we're talking about the brand part of it because, again, we're playing in Amazon sandbox most of the time. And
Right.
they've got some pretty strict rules. But A plus content is a great way to incorporate your brand on your retail page. It's really hard to do in other ways because Amazon doesn't let you include a link to your website. You got to get tricky with that. You know what I mean? There's so many ways that Amazon prevents you from trying to send people off the page
Mm-hmm.
and they will kick back things. They won't let you include certain stuff. They won't let you reference your website. There's all these things that you can't do. But with A plus content, you can visually represent your brand. You can use a very similar or the same banner you use on your website. You can add your logo. There's so many things that you can do on a visual level that Amazon does allow
Yeah.
that you can't do in written form. You know what I mean? So that's another place. Like this is where you actually turn your Amazon retail page and bring in elements of your brand. So you turn it into your own.
Right, right, exactly. Okay, so and I'm going to have you kick off the the A plus content audit. I want you to lead off with that, but I want to talk a little bit about what I have been alluding to since we started the show, which
Oh,
is
yay. I don't know
yay.
this either. Like the list for everybody listening, it's like I didn't see these notes either. So I've been on the edge of my seat just as you have been.
Oh my gosh, that's so funny. All right, so Amazon reports, and I am just reading this just from some of the articles that I pulled together. Amazon reports that A plus content can improve a product's conversion rate by 3 to 10% on average.
Crazy.
Right? Basic A plus content alone. So even if you don't get if you feel like I'm not talented enough to get something really crazy, but I'm going to keep it it's going to be lovely, it's going to be on brand, it's going to feel like the book, etc., has known to show a sales increase of up to 8%.
That's amazing.
Right? Premium A plus content. Now, I think the premium A plus content really refers to a lot of their non-book retail pages because they're like some of that premium content, like their videos and things like that, they can drive sales up to 20% higher.
And I think that's amazing but I think we've all experienced that, right? Penny, you've been shopping on Amazon where a brand takes a moment to actually put a bunch of additional information about the product, their A plus content, about their company and how it was founded, how it's run, all those kind of things. And all of a sudden you're like, now I take this product and this company so much more seriously.
Yeah, exactly.
Because they've given you all this additional information. And to your point about how it doesn't have to be fancy, the difference in just adding a very clear branded logo that matches your website elevates you above hundreds of thousands of other books and authors that are on Amazon right now.
Yeah, exactly. And even a mid-range, so they estimate that even a mid-range increase, 5% up to 10%, can really, I mean, it can change your life if you're sitting here and you're thinking, I'm not selling books. I read this book over the holiday break. I love reading. As Amy knows, like I just devour like business books and Good to Great and all those other things. But anyway, I read this book over the holiday break and it talked about how incrementally getting 1% better, right? So getting 1% better. So if you're listening to this and you're like, oh, this just sounds like a lot of work, a 1% better sales lift on your retail page doesn't sound like a lot, maybe, but over time, it can really change your life, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And if you're thinking, if you can even pull off 1% for each, mini project that you commit to doing improvements, you know what I mean? So like your A plus content can be a 1%, but we're going to do other shows that can account for another 1%. You know what I mean? So those 1% can add up. Even if one effort only gives you an extra 1%, there's other work you can still do that's typically very simple. It just often gets overlooked. And then you're adding up those 1% and all of a sudden, like you said, Penny, you're in a whole other league.
You're in a whole other league. Yeah. And it really talked about, it gave a whole bunch of examples about how companies that have implemented the 1% rule, and how it changes in ways where you just think, oh, 1%, it's not really going to matter. It absolutely does matter. So if you ever, not just this show, but any show that we do, if you ever listen to these shows, you're just like, oh, I'm just so overwhelmed. Just make an effort to just, make a 1%, just be 1% better than you were yesterday or last week or last month or last year, whatever. And keep, chipping away at it, because and this is, I'm in the middle of rewriting, I should say, 5-minute book marketing for authors. And this is really where I think authors have struggled with marketing, because it feels like it's this big thing, right? It's this big elephant in the room, so to speak, right?
Right.
And one of the reasons why I think the 5-minute book marketing for authors is important, and why I wanted to redo it, is because you have to, if you keep chipping away at all these things, eventually you're going to look back and you're just think, oh my gosh, I accomplished so much. So if your only takeaway from this is got to have A+ content, got to be 1% better, I consider that a win. Absolutely. Amy, talk a little. So why don't you walk us through doing the content audit?
Yes.
So what's the first thing? So if somebody has A+ content and they're like, oh, I'm not really seeing a sales lift, like I'm not really seeing any benefits from it. Talk us through what they might be doing wrong.
Right. Okay. So step one, and we say this for a lot of different, things that we talk about, but you want to look at it like a reader, like a shopper.
Mm-hmm.
We say it all the time. It's very easy to get too close to your own work. Everything makes sense to you, right? Because you're the author.
Yes.
So you really have to be smart about being objective. All right. So, and Penny, you mentioned this earlier. Does your A+ content, does it match the book cover? Does this look like the same product? Or do you have a book cover that, goes in one way, but then your A+ content uses entirely different colors, uses entirely different fonts? Believe it or not, the brain recognizes that. Somebody may not be sitting there and going, oh, that's this font. That's okay. That's very technical. But believe it or not, everything is much more seamless for the brain when fonts work together and complement each other versus jumping around. And they also set a tone. So and then we talked about this too. Would a stranger understand what makes the book different? You got to remember, a lot of times, this is the first time somebody is interacting with your brand or your book. Okay. So you don't want to put anything in your A+ content that would be confusing or that needs a lot of context, because that doesn't make sense. And they're already going to feel like, okay, well, at that point, they've already missed the boat. They were late to the party. I'm just going to move on to something else. Right. And then skim, like Penny said, skim, spend like 5 seconds. Don't overanalyze it. Really challenge yourself to spend 5 seconds looking at your A+ content. And is it emotional? Is it informative? Is it doing what it needs to do in order to get somebody to go, I want to buy this book? And if it doesn't, then that's a problem.
Yeah.
It's very simple, but your A+ content has to make sense for the book, for your cover, for your description, the whole tone. But it also, you have to remember, it has a purpose. It's there to convert. It's there to help you make that sale.
Right.
So is it doing that, or did you just throw stuff up there to say you did A+ content to check it off your list because you knew that was the right thing to do? I get it. That happens a lot. Not shaming you, but really, this is the time to really evaluate and go, okay, is that really working for me, or is it just there? Right.
Right, exactly. And I also think that, to our next point about evaluating the messaging, that what you pointed out happens a lot, right? So authors get overwhelmed and they want to check it off their list, and they think, oh my gosh, I've got to get this, uploaded on Amazon and get it done. And then they go back and they do this eval and they realize, well, the messaging doesn't really match the book, or there's too much verbiage on it. Like we said, that Midwest book review that's jammed into this little box, and you can't really, right.
Nobody's going to try to read that. It's going to hurt their eyes.
Right, exactly. But a lot of times what happens when authors just kind of rush to put the A+ content is that, yes, the text can be definitely too long, but a lot of times it's too vague or too generic.
Right.
Right. So that's the other thing, though, too, is that you really have to make sure. So we did actually last year, we did a whole show about elevator pitches. So if you didn't listen to that show, if you're a new listener, first off, welcome. We love new listeners. but go back and listen to that show because that will help you a lot with this messaging, right?
Mhm.
You don't want to be too generic. For example, this book is about love and loss, as opposed to a slow burn, grief to love romance, perfect for fans of Henry, right? For nonfiction, learn practical steps to improve your life. I read a lot of nonfiction. I would never pick up a book that said learn practical steps to improve your life. Like what part of my life? Like my fitness life, like my,
Right.
you know what I mean?
Exactly.
Like my
Mhm.
dog's life. I would never, a 30-day system to break mental spirals and rebuild momentum. Boom.
Right.
Right. Again, go back to that elevator pitch show. We covered a lot of this stuff, but the messaging is really, really important. Don't hesitate to burn down your A+ content if you didn't hit either of these two marks and rebuild it because it's definitely going to be worth your while. Amy, talk about the design because the design you do the design for our A+ content authors. It's a process.
Right. Yes. And a lot of it, believe it or not, I mean, is trial and error. And I don't mean to say that like this is going to take you hours and hours and days. It's not like that. But it is important, like we said, if it's not done properly, it's going to hurt you more than it's going to help you.
Yep.
So you don't want to throw it together, cross your fingers and hope it's okay. There is a preview option so you can actually see what it's going to look like. 100% do that. I can't tell you how many times once I've previewed something, I've thought, you know what, that spacing could be better. Or there could be, you know what I mean? Or maybe that color is a little too bright once you look at the preview. So really use that preview to assess, are the fonts clean and readable? Does the module feel uncluttered? We keep using the cramming the entire book review into one little square, but that's very much a real thing. Nobody's going to try to read that. Does it all look cohesive? I would say do what feels natural and what you're confident in. You can always build on it. You can use up to 5 modules. Don't feel like you have to do all 5. Maybe start with 2 because, and we'll get to this later, but as you get accolades, you may not have accolades right now. And that might be a module you'll want to be sure to add later once your book starts gaining momentum. You know what I mean?
Right.
So don't force it. Just do what makes sense and do what works for you and that what focuses on closing the sale. More isn't always better. Sometimes it's just more, right?
For sure. Yeah, exactly.
Because again, similar to a book cover, I'm going to say it, and sorry if this is hard to hear, but if something is poorly designed, you lower the trust in the shopper and they are not going to buy because it's not going to look professional and it's going to look like something that somebody cobbled together on their own that doesn't know what they're doing. And I realize that sounds very harsh, but the reality is people have a lot of options on Amazon. You know what I mean? They don't have to buy a subpar product. So you really want to focus on doing things correctly. And you absolutely can. This is not flashy. This is not complex, but it is about paying attention to the details and holding yourself accountable to having, again, clear readable fonts, making sure that it works, that it looks okay, that it matches your cover, all the things we've been talking about. They're very simple, but just, again, hold yourself accountable to checking all those important things off the list.
Yeah, exactly. And then I think that here's something that a lot of authors forget
Yeah.
is to look at your A+ content on mobile because it can really look crammed when you open up the mobile app, which I don't know about you, Amy, but when was the last time? I can't think of the last time that I actually shopped on Amazon desktop.
No, if I'm on Amazon on the desktop, I'm working. It's not it's not for pleasure. I'm doing, you know what I mean? I'm working on client stuff and I have a very different focus.
Yeah, exactly. So make sure that you are checking
Yep.
the mobile, because you could end up it
Not only
it could really look
yeah.
bad on mobile. Yeah.
And not only, this is worth mentioning, not only can it look more crammed, and you have to remember something that looks like it's too small of a font on your desktop is definitely going to be too small on a mobile. But in addition to that, A+ content shows up differently on mobile. So you're not going to get that that long stretched out version, you're going to get everything stacked on top of each other. So again, it doesn't mean you have to rework everything, but at the same time, this is one of those things. Hold yourself accountable. Be willing to make some tweaks to see what looks best, because it may look great on the desktop version, which is good. You want that too. But then if it looks crazy on the mobile, maybe it's worth reconsidering, like, okay, maybe I don't, to my point previously, you don't need to fill in all 5 modules just because you can, right?
Yeah.
So maybe one of those just doesn't work on mobile, and across the board, it's better to leave it out,
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So let's power through the most common mistakes. I want to take the first one because I love the
Go for it. Yeah.
Amy added this one. Treating A+ content like a mood board. I laughed out loud at the show notes when I was going through these when we were in the green room. I just thought that was just so funny. And it's really interesting because a lot of times I also love the term vision board. Like the authors, like sometimes I will look at A+ content and I'm just like, wow,
Right. Yeah.
you are having a day. So remember that, and we say this about everything what you do with your book. This is not about you. This is about your reader, right? Okay, next one.
Overwriting. I mean, again, we've talked about this a lot. Yeah, A+ content, not the place for paragraphs. Short, tight messaging. We've talked about this a lot too. Skimmable is key. This is definitely, it needs to be more visual than it needs to be right. That, you don't want them to sit there and have to like, okay, what is that? You know what I mean? So if you're going to use text, which is great when it's well placed, but if you can't fit in what you have to say with a text that is large enough for people to read, then you're saying too much.
Right, exactly. Ignoring genre cues. So my recommendation to you is go through other similar books and take a look at how they are approaching their A+ content and what they're doing with their visuals, right?
Mhm.
So that's a big one. But I think and we've talked about this. We don't have to go into that too much, but man, you got to match your genre for sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. Genre, colors, it's amazing the difference.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, no clear hook. A+ content should reinforce the book's unique selling point or the reader experience. Selling points, obviously, if you're writing nonfiction for sure, but the reader experience, the world experience, you know what I mean? This is a place to, again, remind them that this is exactly what they're looking for. Again, this is where you close the deal, right?
Right.
These big visual elements. Because if they've gotten this far, they've read the description, or at least they've skimmed it. They apparently think your cover is good enough, right? Cheers, kudos, that's a big deal. Then they get to the A+ content. And this is really, this is before they get to the reviews, but this is really where you're going to have that tipping point of professionalism and reinforcing that this is something worth spending their money and time on,
Exactly. And I think the final one is missing the social proof. So if you have awards, credentials, trust, readers trust reviews. So reviews, things like that. Definitely you want to build that into your book description, obviously, too.
Mm-hmm.
But definitely it's worth incorporating that into your A+ content. Amazon does have some guidelines around that, around, the approval of reviews and things like that. So you just definitely want to look into that. But it's absolutely worth it. I mean, look, A+ content isn't just nice to have. It is a measurable way to elevate your book sales, and the numbers, like I said, that I called out are pretty staggering. So go back and if you haven't done A+ content, definitely get started with it. Start by digging through Amazon and see what some other similar authors have done. Let it inspire your choices. If you have a publisher, I would be teeing up an email right now.
Yep.
Because an A+ content doesn't have to be flashy. It just needs to be effective. And hopefully we have shared some ideas and some ways that it can that you can create some effective A+ content for your retail page. All right, I want to answer that question quickly. The one that we got. So we're not going to mention this person's name, but the question, because we didn't really get the permission, but just know going forward we won't mention your name unless you specifically say, hey, you can say my name on air. Mm-hmm. Hi, ladies. I love listening and re-listening to your podcast. Thank you. Re-listening. That's amazing. As I progress on my author journey, one question about the author pick on Amazon page. Does it always need to be a picture, or does a branded logo across platforms work too? She says, asking for a friend. That's
I
pretty
love that, asking for a friend.
I love that. That's really cute. Thank you so much for your question. We love this. I've seen it both ways. I've seen both the Amazon picture, and I love that she asked this because I think more people have kind of struggled with it. Like if you have a logo for your brand, like kudos to you, because a lot of authors don't.
Right.
But do you have a preference, Amy?
I think, it's funny because this actually came up recently for a client who uses a pen name and he just wants to stay in the zone. It's
For
not,
sure. Yeah.
he's hiding out somewhere. All of that would be very cool. So if that's what's going on, I want to know that story too. But he asked the same thing. And we were discussing, pros and cons. And we've done shows on AI created books and how those retail pages are usually kind of thrown together. And a lot of times there are visual cues when something was not actually made by a real author and does not represent a real author. So my kind of thoughts on it, a logo, especially if this author said she's using it for her entire brand. So I assume she's using it on her website, maybe on social, you know what I mean? So it's out there. I fully support that. I think that's great. And I would say, especially if she is utilizing her entire author central page and really filling that out and has a great bio that sounds very personal and human and all those things, then I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I do, and I can't wait to hear your take, Penny. I do get a little iffy when people start to use cartoon images.
Yes.
Or emojis and things like that, that to me, and maybe that makes me sound old, those to me are kind of red flags for not a real brand, not a real author. You know what I mean? So I would say lean into using all the details to reinforce that you are a real author and you're taking this seriously. And if you want to use a logo or another image that really makes sense for your brand, fine. But I don't know, the cartoony things and then the pictures also of that include a bunch of background stuff. Like you just closed your eyes and pressed, one of the photos on your phone when like it was photo roulette.
Right. Right.
Those also
Exactly.
kind of freak me out too. It's like, who is that even a person in there?
Well, and I really feel so. I think that you have to look at the personal connection that you want to create with the reader. So, readers, we talked about this a ton on the show. Goodreads did a study a number of years ago and found that the first thing that readers want to do when they get to the end of the book is to connect with the author, hopefully, generally, if they've liked the book, right?
Right.
If they got to the end, they probably liked the book. So I think that whether or not you use a photo versus a logo really depends on your reader. I think I don't use so conceivably I could use the logo for my books, right? Because it's the company and the books are nonfiction, but I don't because I want to keep that personal connection to the reader, right? If you have a business topic, right, and you have coaching for Fortune 500s or you whatever, I think a logo would be totally fine. But I mean, don't you agree? I think this is such a great discussion. I'm so glad that we got that question.
Yeah.
I think that the picture, when it's well done, like you said, not a whole bunch of stuff in the background and people that you've cropped out and you know what I mean? Like it looks like you were at Mardi Gras or something crazy.
It's like a
that.
third hand in there from somebody else that
Right. Like we know that you really like that picture of you and your ex-boyfriend, but don't crop him out and have his hand still hanging over your arm.
Right,
I
exactly.
think that picture for right. So, but I think that the brand, the logo works in some places. But I really think that picture creates just a connection with the reader. I mean, am I reading too much into this?
No, I think that makes sense. And actually, as you said that, I'm sitting here thinking like, okay, and that's a very good point because as we talked about A+ content and the cover and all that need to make sense for your brand and your genre and what people are expecting. I think we've both seen, and probably people listening have seen logos that really hit it home. So even a romance author can have a really great logo that clearly says that they're a romance author. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And it can still fit the expectation for the genre, but then you could have another one that doesn't lean as much into, what's expected, that you wouldn't necessarily know. If you just saw it, you would have no idea what genre that author writes in. And to your point, that might, that's when it starts to feel a little less personal, a little less on brand, even if it is your logo. Like, again, and we talked a lot in the show about context. If it doesn't make sense without a lot of context, then there's a good chance it's not working for you. It might be working against you.
Yeah, exactly. I apologize. I realize it's not a one and done answer, but I think that it's a great question, because I bet a lot of other authors have been challenged with this. But it's definitely worth more of a deep dive, in terms of figuring out. So thank you so much for your question. We love your questions. Again, reader feedback. The survey is up in the show notes. I'm going to put the link to that IBPA article that I alluded to in the beginning of this show when we were talking about the changes to KDP. We'll link that in the show notes as well. And don't forget to text the word podcast to 888-402-8940. Thank you so much for tuning in. We will see you next week. Bye-bye.